Hi, welcome to this channel. My name is Will. Now recently the Philippines reopened to foreign nationals after being shut for almost 2 years. So now is as good a time as any to talk about things that are worth knowing before we go into the Philippines. In this video we are not going to be talking about how to get to the Philippines, but we are going to be talking about things that are worth knowing when you're there. This should hopefully be helpful not just to foreigners but also balikbayans, as some things may have changed in the Philippines since you were last there. Now one of the first things that is worth knowing is that the Philippines is really strict when it comes to wearing masks. In the UK and most of the rest of the world, even during the tightest restrictions, you only needed to wear masks when you were inside enclosed spaces. So in public transport and when you're inside shops, those were the places where you'd need to wear masks. But when you were outside in open spaces, you weren't required by law to wear masks. But in the Philippines, at least by law, you are required to wear a mask whenever you are outside. So to put it simply, whenever you leave your house or hotel room, you need to wear a mask. Even if you're driving a car and you're with a family member, you both need to wear masks. Or if you're riding a bike, even if you've got a full helmet on that fully covers your face, you still need to wear a mask. As I found out the hard way, I didn't think I'd need to wear a mask when I've got a helmet on that's covering my face, but I was pulled over by a checkpoint and they gave me a ticket and I had to pay a 2,000 peso fine just for not wearing a mask despite my face being fully covered anyway by a helmet. And I didn't even realise. Especially if you're a foreigner, it's really important that you always wear a mask outside. If you go to certain provinces, you might see a lot of locals not wearing masks outside, but if you're a foreigner, it's really important that you always wear a mask outside. As I found out the hard way, even if you're out on a bike and you see other people not wearing a mask, you need to wear one because you might be targeted by checkpoints and police if you're a foreigner, because sadly some Filipinos have a mentality where they think that all foreigners are really rich, and you could be an easy target as a foreigner if you're not wearing a mask outside. So just make sure you always wear one, even if you're out in a province and you see some locals not wearing them. They might be able to get away with it, but you probably won't. So it's really important that you keep wearing a mask. Now gradually the Philippines is easing their restrictions, so hopefully these mask wearing rules will change soon and you won't need to wear them in all areas outside. It's not that I don't like masks and don't think people should wear them. I think it's really important, especially in the Philippines where it's densely populated, that people do wear masks in enclosed spaces, when you're in busy markets, when you're inside, in jeepneys. It's really important that Filipinos and everyone wears masks, but hopefully they can ease the mask wearing rules when you're in open areas, and especially when you're driving your own vehicle. You shouldn't need to wear a mask in my opinion, so hopefully that can change soon. But at least as of right now of this recording, you still need to wear a mask at all times when you're outside in the Philippines. Basically whenever you leave your own property or hotel room, you need to wear a mask. The next thing that's worth knowing, at least in my opinion, is that Grab is better than taxis. Grab is basically the Pinoy version of Uber. You need to download the app and then you can search where you want to go, and then it will show you different options. Usually there will be different options you can choose from, especially if you're in Manila. If you're going to one place to another, you can search on the app where you're going and then it will tell you the price, and the price will never change. Whereas with taxis, it can always be different, the price, and you can often get overcharged, especially as a foreigner, and they can sometimes turn off the meter in a taxi and then charge you more than what the meter would have ever said. So especially as a foreigner, I'd strongly recommend that you use Grab instead of taxis. And I think they're a bit safer as well, and you know what you're going to pay for, and you can literally choose before they even arrive because it will show you the price. And you can even choose what type of vehicle. So if you're going to an airport, it might be worth choosing a bigger vehicle, even if it's a bit more expensive, and then you can fit all your luggage in it. Because when you're choosing which vehicle you want, it will say how many seats there are. So if there's more of you, you can choose a vehicle that has more seats. Whereas if you're on your own, you could pay for a cheaper vehicle that maybe only has 2 seats. So I find Grab really good and reliable. And the good thing about Grab is that the price will never change. Even if you're in really bad traffic, it's not like a taxi where the meter will keep going up and up and up. With Grab, it will always be the set price. So especially if you're a foreigner, it's a much better alternative, at least in my opinion, to taxis. Another thing that's worth knowing that is quite important to know is that tap water isn't very safe to drink in the Philippines, especially if you've not really been there before and your body isn't used to what the Philippines is like. It's not very safe at all to drink tap water. Even most locals won't drink tap water. They'll use filtered water where they have these big tubs and then they fill them up, typically for about 25 pesos, and then they use that water to drink from. If you're a foreigner and your body isn't used to the Philippines, it's probably best just to use mineral water, or at least boil water with a kettle, but I'd probably recommend just using mineral water as that's the safest option. Definitely don't drink from a tap. Some people would even clean their teeth using mineral water, some foreigners, not locals. But I wouldn't go that far, I just wouldn't drink tap water there. I'd use mineral water or filtered water, or at least boil a kettle, but definitely don't just drink water straight from a tap because it's not very safe and then you could get sick from that. So that is really important to know before you go to the Philippines. The next thing probably applies just to foreigners, and that's that if you are going to shop in markets, in wet markets, if you're on your own and you don't have a local friend with you, expect to pay more prices than what you might pay in a supermarket. It's definitely worth experiencing the wet markets in the Philippines. I found them a really fun experience. But if you're new to the Philippines, you don't speak the language and you don't have a local friend with you, chances are you will get overcharged for items. So once you've experienced it, it's probably just from a practical sense a lot better just shopping in shopping malls and supermarkets, because everything's a lot easier to find, it's all laid out better. It's probably safer some of the food there to eat because it's not being left out of fridges, and you'll probably end up paying a lot less for it as well, as foreigners might get overcharged for some items in wet markets. But I would encourage people to use markets in the Philippines because they're a really fun experience, and maybe bring your local friend with you so they can help bring the prices down for you. The next thing I'd strongly recommend is that you don't just stay in Manila. I'm not saying Manila is a bad place or anything. There's lots of really good things to do in Manila, but once you've explored Manila and you've seen what you want to do there, I strongly recommend that you go out of Manila and explore the provinces. There's so many amazing things to do in the Philippines. It's so diverse, the culture and scenery there. The Philippines has some of the best natural scenery in the world. You've got the Chocolate Hills, you've got Mount Mayon in Bicol, you've got the white sand beaches in Boracay, you've got the stunning islands in Palawan. There's so many things to do in the Philippines outside of Manila. So if you're spending time in the Philippines, make sure you explore outside of the capital, Manila, because you'll be missing out on so many things if you just stayed in Manila. But definitely explore Manila as well, because there's a lot to do there. They've got some really impressive shopping malls there, and there's a lot of history in Manila. But at some point, definitely explore outside of there, because you'll be missing out a lot if you don't. So the next thing applies just to foreigners, and it's going to sound really obvious when I say this, but when I say this, I cannot stress this enough, because this probably applies to the Philippines more than pretty much any other country in the world, and that's that you should not do anything illegal in terms of any substances that are not allowed in the Philippines. Even if it's something that may be legal in states in America, in the whole of Canada, don't even think of trying that in the Philippines, because they are really strict there and you shouldn't even think of doing anything like that there. Even if you have something for medication that wouldn't be allowed in the Philippines and you had a card or something, they would not recognize that there. If you really depend on that for medicine, you'd have to find an alternative, or you could not go to the Philippines at all. Again, this probably sounds really obvious me saying this, but there might be some people that aren't aware of how strict the Philippines are. I think most foreigners are, because during the first few months of when the Philippines elected their president in 2016, there was a lot of stuff that went in the news from the first few months of his presidency. So I think a lot of foreigners are aware of what the Philippines is like. But in case you weren't, I hope you are now. So just be careful when you're out there. Always follow their rules. Don't do anything that is not allowed in the Philippines, whatever that is. And this probably applies to the mask wearing as well. Always wear a mask there when you're outside. Follow the road rules as well, because they have a lot of traffic enforcers. So be careful when you drive on the roads there, and definitely don't do anything bad there. that could get you in trouble, because if you get in trouble in the Philippines, it'll be a really harsh penalty compared to what it would be in Western countries. So always take care in the Philippines. I'm not trying to scare anyone when I say this, it's just use common sense and follow the rules. Now the next thing is kind of my opinion, and that's that I would strongly recommend freshwater springs instead of beaches. Now the Philippines does have some of the world's most stunning beaches with perfect white sands like in Boracay, but a lot of other beaches in the Philippines might have a lot of rubbish and won't be as nice. At least in my opinion, I think that freshwater springs tend to be nicer than the average beach in the Philippines, and I'd strongly recommend them. They're so fresh, they feel so clean, and especially when it's hot and humid in the Philippines, swimming in freshwater springs is one of the nicest feelings. It was one of my favourite things to do when I was in the Philippines, and I couldn't recommend them more. So when you're out in the Philippines, make sure you explore all the local freshwater springs around you. Try out some beaches as well, but from my experience I preferred freshwater springs, and they tend not to be too busy, and often when you go to one that's a resort, they have really cheap entrance fees and they're definitely worth it. So try them out when you go to the Philippines. Now the last thing you should know is that you should try out local dishes. Pinoy food is some of the most underrated, not just in Southeast Asia, but the entire world. I love caldereta, I love kare-kare, I love lechon, and of course adobo, probably the most famous Pinoy dish. There are so many amazing underrated dishes in the Philippines that are definitely worth trying out, and it tastes a lot better in the Philippines when you've got the fresh local ingredients rather than having Pinoy food in other countries. Quite often as well, if you're going to try having food that originates from other countries in the Philippines, you'll often pay more money. If you want to have pizza, if you want to have European or American food, you can often pay more money, whereas you can get local food cheaper that tastes a lot better and is a lot more authentic. And I couldn't recommend it more. It would be such a waste to go out to the Philippines and not try their local dishes, because they are so underrated and definitely up there with some of the best. And it's always overlooked, Filipino food. Whenever people think about Southeast Asian dishes, they always think of Thai food and hardly ever think of Pinoy food. It always gets overlooked, and I really think it shouldn't, because it's really good. I definitely recommend it. So those were 8 things you should know before going to the Philippines that should make your experience better. I hope you enjoyed this video and or found it informative. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe as well if you're not already. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.